Hi there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Madison Spenlin, and I am the MDI and EDI coordinator here at the Human Early Learning Partnership. And I have with me today a couple of members of our team here, Merritt Gilbert and Jillian Corliss. And we're really happy to introduce Dr. Kimberly Shonert-Reckel, who's going to talk about our new Human Development Program of Research. So I think most of you are joining us because you didn't have the opportunity to join us at the Fall Expo that we had just this past month, which was really excellent, and so excellent that we wanted to ask Kim to be able to share this presentation with you here, and you have the opportunity to ask her some questions at the end. So with that, I'll just do a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, and if you have any questions throughout the presentation, sorry, just getting an echo here. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them into your chat at any time, and we'll collect those. And also at the end, we'll have the opportunity for you to speak into your microphone and ask a question. So to do that, you can just raise your hand, and we'll be able to unmute you here. So with that, I will hand it over to Kim.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today and go through basically the same talk that I gave at the Health Expo and introduce you to our new Human Development Program of Research and kind of where health is going right now. I think some of you know, or maybe many of you know, I'm stepped into the position as Interim Director of Health, and it's my pleasure to be able to share with you what we're doing right now and where we hope to go in the next, I'm going to say, many years ahead. So you're gonna learn about this vision and how it's also being realized right now as well. So I'm going to take you through the slides, and then I guess you can ask questions along the way, and we'll see how it goes. I see this as pretty informal, and we can kind of see, what kinds of questions you have and what kind of questions at the end as well. So I think one of the things in terms of reflecting on changes at Health, we have had, as many of you know, a number of changes at Health. Oh, should I speak? Oh, maybe we'll move thanks. We'll move this closer. Is that better? Do people find that better? You have them raise their hand. Hopefully that works now. And anyway, so I'm going to go back to this and see. So we're going to be reflecting on some changes at Health. As you know, we've had a number of changes. We have Jeannie Chevalier, who was the Interim Director of Health for this past 18 months, who's stepped down now. Joanne Schroeder as well has left Health, and we have Pippa Rowcliffe as the Interim Deputy Director of Health as well as a number of other new people at Health. So we're really looking at the changes in Health and seeing how we're going to move forward. And with that becomes a new energy and really this idea of where we're going to go and some excitement about the new things that are happening at Health. So I'm just excited to be able to share with you where we're going and this new energy about this new vision that is going to be realized and where we're going with that. And I also want to mention, I've worked just a little bit of background about me. I think some of you may have heard me mostly maybe through the MDI or through social and emotional learning, but I also wonder if some of you know that I've actually worked with Clyde. I worked with Clyde for about 15 years around different initiatives, including the Roots of Empathy program and a number of different programs and projects as well. And one of the areas, knowing Clyde's vision about growing health, and one of the areas he had wanted for a long time is actually to create a data set that would allow us to look at children across multiple aspects of their lives and over time. So not only just looking at children during the entering in kindergarten, but also looking at health and linking health data to their well-being, as well as also looking at children across middle childhood and into adolescence. And what we're now happy to say, after many years of really working toward this, we now have this actual linked data set where we now have the health data to link to EDI over time from birth and onwards, as well as the linked data to the middle years development instrument. So for example, right now, we have about data from about 11,000 children in the province who were in kindergarten and took had the EDI, and then again have the MDI. So we're able now to start looking at these data linkages and coming to fruition of these visions that have been long out there. So I'm going to begin with the story of resiliency, because what these data linkages allow us to do is to not only identify the problems that occur, children who are early on start with risk and how that grows into risk, but also to think about resiliency and think about what are the factors that along a child's lifespan, if they're vulnerable, for example, in kindergarten, are there factors that you can actually intervene and redirect that trajectory to have more positive human development, more positive growth. So I'm going to begin with a story of that just to share with you a story about resiliency. And some of you might have heard it before, because it's certainly not a story that I have that I had heard before. And it's the story of Teddy Stoddard. So I'm just going to read this to you. There was a story many years ago of an elementary teacher. Her name was Mrs. Thompson. And as she stood in front of her 5th grade class on the very first day of school, she told the children a lie. Like most teachers, she looked at her students and said that she loved them all the same. But that was impossible, because there in the front row, slumped in a seat, was a little boy named Teddy Stoddard. Mrs. Thompson had watched Teddy the year before and noticed that he didn't play well with others, that his clothes were messy, and that he constantly needed a bath. And Teddy could be unpleasant. It got to the point where Mrs. Thompson would actually take delight in marking his papers with a broad red pen, making bold X's where he had mistakes, and then putting a big fat F at the top of his papers. At the school where Mrs. Thompson taught, she was required to review each child's past records, and she put Teddy's off until the last. However, when she reviewed his file, she was in for a surprise. Teddy's 1st grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is a bright child with a ready laugh. He does his work neatly and has good manners. He's a joy to be around." His 2nd grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is an excellent student, well liked by his classmates, but he is troubled because his mother has a terminal illness and life at home must be a struggle." His 3rd grade teacher wrote, "His mother's death has been hard on him. He tries to do his best, but his father doesn't show much interest, and his home life will soon affect him if some steps aren't taken." Teddy's 4th grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is withdrawn. He doesn't show much interest in school. He doesn't have many friends, and sometimes he sleeps in class." By now, Mrs. Thompson realized the problem, and she was ashamed of herself. She felt even worse when her students brought her Christmas presents wrapped in beautiful ribbons and bright paper, except for Teddy's. His present was clumsily wrapped in the heavy brown paper that he got from a grocery bag. Mrs. Thompson took pains to open it in the middle of the other presents. Some of the children started to laugh when she found a rhinestone bracelet with some of the stones missing and a bottle that was 1/4 full of perfume. But she stifled the children's laughter when she exclaimed how pretty the bracelet was, and putting it on, and then dabbing some of the perfume on her wrist. Teddy Stoddard stayed after school that day just long enough to say, "Mrs. Thompson, today you smell just like my mom used to." After the children left, she cried for at least an hour. On that very day, she quit teaching reading and writing and arithmetic. Instead, she began to teach children. Mrs. Thompson paid particular attention to Teddy. As she worked with him, his mind seemed to come alive. The more she encouraged him, the faster he responded. By the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the smartest children in the class. And despite her lie that she would love all the children the same, Teddy became one of her teacher's pets. A year later, she found a note under her door from Teddy telling her that she was still the best teacher he ever had in his whole life. 6 years went by before she got another note from Teddy. He then wrote that he had finished. I'm just worried about people hearing. 6 years went by before she got another note from Teddy. He then wrote that he had finished high school, 3rd in his class, and she was still the best teacher he ever had in his whole life. 4 years after that, she got another letter saying that while things had been tough at times, he stayed in school and stuck with it, and would soon graduate from college with the highest of honors. He assured Mrs. Thompson that she was still the best and favorite teacher he had in his whole life. Then 4 more years passed, and another letter came. This time he explained he had gotten his bachelor's degree and decided to go a little further. The letter explained that she was still the best and favorite teacher he ever had, but now his name was a little longer. The letter was signed Theodore F. Stoddard, M.D. The story doesn't end there. You see, there was yet another letter that spring. Teddy said he'd met this girl and he was going to be married. He explained that his father had died a couple of years ago, and he was wondering if Mrs. Thompson might agree to sit in a place at the wedding that was usually reserved for the mother of the groom. Of course, Mrs. Thompson did, and guess what? She wore that bracelet, the one with the several rhinestones missing, and she made sure she was wearing the perfume that Teddy remembered his mother wearing on their last Christmas together. They hugged each other, and Dr. Stoddard whispered in Mrs. Thompson's ear, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for believing in me. Thank you so much for making me feel important and showing me that I could make a difference." Mrs. Thompson, with tears in her eyes, whispered back. She said, "Teddy, you have it all wrong. You were the one who taught me that I could make a difference. I didn't know how to teach until I met you." So that story, sorry for the brief interruption. I was worried that people weren't, I love it so much. Just says, how do you tell the story about falling apart? It is a story, I know, so I will have to say, I do have like tears in my eyes because it is hard, because, you know, I think what it really represents and talking about this idea of how we can look at children's lives over time, and how now at HELP we can begin to unfold these stories of children and find out what are the differences that made a difference in their life, what are the factors that promote their resiliency, and how we could find ways in which to intervene early for them. So that's really our question at HELP, and it has been for, I think for me, since the beginning, since the first time I think I met Clyde. He really talked about what are the differences that make a difference, and what are the differences that we can make to make a difference in the lives of children. And I'll be telling you now, sort of following up from that story, and also how it fits with our new human development program of research where we're linking these data. So now, we're going to start with a picture, a baby, an infant, beginning life, who then becomes a toddler, goes to kindergarten, goes on to middle years in grade 4 and grade 7, and then goes on to high school, and then graduates high school and leads a successful life into adulthood. What are these factors that influence that child's life all along the way? For instance, during childhood, how does parental stress early on impact a child's early development? We know now, for instance, there's something called a stress contagion, and parents who are highly stressed can filter that down to children. And we also know that stress early on in the child's life can actually damage their prefrontal cortex, how they manage their emotions and their cognition by the impact of stress, especially among those children in poverty. I was just going to make a mention here. So along the way, I'm going to be talking about some research, and if people want the specific research articles, we'll make a list of those and provide those. Does that sound good? So, for example, this research on the stress contagion is some work by Clancy Blair that has looked at this idea of parental, both stress, child's early stress and brain development. There's also children in the toddler years and the idea of being with their parents. But what is the influence of communities on early developmental health and well-being? How do communities support parents and others and children in helping realize their potential, and what are the detrimental effects of being in a community that can negatively influence development? And talking about those factors like socioeconomic status as well as connectedness to support of others. And then a child begins elementary school and begins to move out of his or her own family environment in the small neighborhood to one of school, with many more interactions and many more influences in child development. So how do we know this early development, the child's cognitive, social, and emotional competence predict later school success? I'll tell you briefly about one story, well, a couple of different recent studies. For example, there is a study that followed 1,000 children across childhood to the age of 30, so birth to 30, about 1,000 children in Dunedin, New Zealand. And every year after the child enters school, they measured their self-control, different variables in terms of how they manage themselves. And what they found when they, at 30 years of age, how you actually managed your finances, your mental health, your criminal activity, your educational attainment, all were most strongly predicted about these from these early developmental elementary school years and how you were able to have self-control. The other study that I'd like to share with you about this later success, there was a study done of children in grade 3. And in grade 3, they looked at children's social and emotional competence, or pro-sociality, and their academic achievement. And then what they did is they followed those children up until grade 8. And they found that the best predictor of a grade 3, in grade 8, academic achievement was grade 3, not academic achievement, it was your social and emotional competence in grade 3. So what we're learning now from the recent science is these early years, when children are in school, their cognitive, social, and emotional competence predicts their later school success and subsequent even graduation. We also know that peers play a huge role in a teenager's development, and we're beginning to look at some of this research on children's peer relationships and the influence they can have on their later success. So for instance, there's what we know from the research is children who are accepted by their peer group, who feel a part of positive, strong relationships, are more likely to be successful in school. And in fact, children who have a positive peer group also are more likely to behave in a way that is more pro-social, helping, caring, sharing, cooperating. Other interesting research on peer relationships during the school years finds that children, that if you're not part of a peer group, so for example, if you don't have high peer acceptance, but you have at least one quality friendship, one friendship that's high in quality, that's supportive, that it buffers the negative effects of not belonging to a peer group. So we know lots of research now about peers, and we'll be able to look at them even further with our research here in the Human Development Program of Research. We also know that we are trying to look at those factors that protect children from risk and adversity during the transition from childhood to adolescence. Just briefly, what happens during early adolescence, or the grades between 4 and 7, is actually a very time of increased vulnerability due to the nature and pace of changes that occur in such a short time period. Changes in cognition, social development, peer group, moving away from the adults, and puberty, certainly the biological changes. And some people say there's more changes that occur during that time period than any other time in the life cycle, except maybe the first year of life. And what we know, the factors that protect individuals are caring relationships with adults. That seems to be one of the most important factors. In fact, in a recent study using MDI data, where we were trying to predict well-being among 4th graders, we found that the single best predictor of well-being in grade 4 was not supportive relationships at home, was not socioeconomic status. It actually was supportive adults at school. So that's some other recent research that we have on the MDI. And we also know that culture has an influence on child development, that we can't look at children in a vacuum, that in fact there's cultural factors that influence their well-being, including their language group, as well as a larger social culture. And I would even talk about the culture of technology and how that is, in terms of where children are in time and place right now, it's such a different time period than even a decade ago in terms of how children communicate with each other and communicate across the globe. And finally, we're looking at what are the skills and competencies that predict a child's success in school and in life, and being able to identify those critical factors that we know that early on can sort of redirect, if a child starts off vulnerable, redirect them onto a path of success, and really being able to identify those factors. And we know that cognitive and communication certainly plays a critical role, but so does other factors such as social competence, how you get along with others, how you're able to manage your emotions and emotionally self-regulate are other really important factors for a child's success in school and in life. And then we also know that we have to, how do we build political will for a better generational deal? This is really looking at the wonderful work of Dr. Paul Kershaw in terms of thinking about the idea of how a larger socio-political ideologies actually influence a child's development. Where children are, I think of the work that we do with the Middle Years Development Instrument and look at after school time for children and find out what do children do after school. And many children, in a survey we did with parents several years ago, we asked parents, what are the barriers to getting your child involved in some after-school programs? And the number one barrier was money of getting their child. And then, of course, it was time and the idea that the school day ends at 3 and the work day ends at 5. But the idea of how do we sort of galvanize this political will to actually create the context which all children can thrive and flourish. And really looking at this larger nation, global, and this human development program of research within a context. So if you look at this notion, we've always talked about the Bronfenbrenner model, about how all the multiple influences that we have on children, that nation and global, the community, as well as the family, the school, peer group, as well as the culture. All of these factors interact with one another to influence a child's trajectory, and even the child, him or herself, interacts with these other dimensions to influence the outcomes that we see happen. So again, moving back to this question of what are the differences that make a difference, what's exciting here at HELP now is that we are going to be able to have the data linkage through the health data, through the EDI, linking it to the Middle Years Development Instrument, linking it to education data in terms of achievement as well as graduation rates and others, to be able to, for the children here in BC, map out and identify those factors that can predict success, that are protective factors, that buffer negative effects, and how those then can help continue on into adulthood. As I mentioned before, we have now in development is the Toddler Development Instrument, and there might be a webinar on that at some point, is someone talking about that, and that's the 18-month Finding Out Children's Lives. And then CHECK now is it's an instrument that really looks at children's development as they enter kindergarten, but it really looks back at a parent interview, looking at what a child's first 5 years of life were, because one of the factors with the EDI, the Early Development Instrument, is not knowing what led up to children to be at that place. So this is a very extensive and well-developed survey of parents to talk about the child's early years. And then, of course, we have the Early Development Instrument and the Middle Years Development in grade 4. And I'm not sure, I'm assuming everyone's familiar with the MDI and the EDI, but certainly we can talk about that further if people have questions. The MDI 7, when children are in grade 7. And just an idea now, I hope it comes to fruition, is the YDI, when children are 15 and in grade 10, is another way to now look at these trajectories in terms of looking at positive development and thriving and identifying those factors. We're really trying to move away. Well, I guess we have to think about intervention and prevention. On the one hand, we have intervention where we throw children, the life preserver when they're sort of already at risk, and try and pull them up to bring them to success. And the sort of working with the EDI to working the MDI to figure out who those children are. But then we also have looking at prevention, where we in fact equip children with the life jacket, where we identify those factors that promote positive well-being and give them to equip children with those skills before they fall into the water, and or actually when they're in the water, it keeps them afloat. And so this idea of looking both at intervention and prevention is a way that, again, we'll be able to, with these data linkages, identify those factors that make a difference. And in closing, I want to say that it takes a village. And one of the aspects of, as the interim director of HELP, I have to say what is critical to me and why I've taken on this position was really because of the community collaborations. I think, on the one hand, I've been at the University UBC for 23 years now, and it is really through my association with HELP where I've really been able to feel that the research makes a difference in children's lives through collaborations with all of you, with the people who are out there making the difference. And to me, that is the only way any change can happen for children, for us to work in collaboration. So we welcome your any comments, questions, any ideas for what we can do, because to me this is a joint partnership of us working together to really help create a wonderful and successful world for children of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. So, Thanks everyone for sticking with us. I heard that a couple people are having sound issues, but I know it's not everyone, so I do apologize if you can't hear me. Not that great. We are recording the webinar and we'll send it out afterwards. I think most of you can hear us, or else you were very patient and have stayed on for longer than I would have guessed. So now we're happy to open up both the microphones. The chat is open to any questions you have about some of the. Tim just did a broad sweep of a lot of different topics and questions. So if any questions come to mind, we have posed a few questions that we're hoping we can get some feedback from the group on. We being it's Kim and it's Merritt, Jillian and I are the implementation team, so we're the ones working with school districts and communities to both collect this data and then help support you in accessing and moving to action with the data. So we are going to open it up. I'll read out some of the questions that are typed in. And again, if you'd like to be unmuted, you can just raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone. This only works if you have a microphone with you at your computer, and then we'll just get started. So first off, one question we have from Heidi. Hello, Heidi. How can I influence our school district to implement the MDI assessment? That's a great question.
It is a great question.
We have the right person here.
Well, and Heidi, I love how you spell your name. Sorry, I just had to say that. It's so cool. But, you know, there's a lot, you know, I've been working on the MDI since, I want to say 2007, you know, since we began, and really in the area of looking at children's strengths. And it's really a shift. It's a paradigm shift for a lot of people trying to understand, like, our focus on children's strengths, the idea that children can give us the responses. And I think it depends on who you need to influence. You know, sometimes, so first of all, if I had something to say, I'd say find some other like-minded people and go together as a team to influence. So you're not the lone person there. But I think, you know, I'm thinking that there's some ways that you could get some information to see the school reports and maybe to talk to another district that has had real success in using the MDI. So to really go and say, okay, what were the factors that influenced you? What were the factors that really, you know, was the tipping point for convincing your superintendent or convincing your district people? So I think that would be some way. I'm just going to look at my team and see if there's a. Jillian has something here.
Hi, Heidi. How are you doing? It's Jillian. So Heidi hosted Conveyor, and yeah, earlier in the spring we went up and we did a report out on Aboriginal EDI data. So Heidi, I know your district is super involved on the EDI front and has already gotten involved on the Aboriginal EDI. To me, that's a really good sign. And we'd be happy to connect with your district one-on-one and talk to the superintendent if that would help. I think really Kim's point though about creating connections between the district and community is the way to go. I really do. Yeah.
I think, and I just have to say, you know, the other thing too is if there is a way where we can connect, you know, even just I know a superintendent's letter we had crafted a while ago where we just sort of made 3 main points of why knowing about children's development and their well-being in grade 4 really makes a difference and how that information can help inform the district. I think it's critical. Yeah, I think there's just lots of lessons learned that we can share with you in more detail with a follow-up. That's what I would suggest.
That's good.
They're all fun.
Okay, so we're just looking for more questions. Here we go. What comes before the EDI? And I think I can learn more about that on the website.
Sure. Yeah, I think before the EDI, so there's 2 instruments, so there's a couple of things. There's 2 instruments in development right now, the TDI, the Toddler Development Instrument is one, and so we should have, is there any information on the website on that? There isn't. Oh, so you're hearing something that's not on the website. That is in its developmental phase of really coming up with the questions, and it's been an idea for a long time, and it's a project with other jurisdictions as well. Dr. Martin Goon is working on that, but it's really about this 18-month idea where when children come in for their 18-month doctor's visits, it would be something that they would be questioning the parent about certain things about the child's development. And then the other one is the check, and that's more extensively established now on the website. Nothing on the website. Okay, so you can't go to the web, but you will, Dr. Lori Irwin is the one who is heading up that project, and it's in pilot phase right now of really developing, but it has been really a lot of time and effort so far, with some very interesting findings so far about young children's development. Really extensive information about kind of those first 5 years leading up to the EDI. So I'm trying to think of what would be the best way to.
I think, Sherry, what we're going to do is we'll keep you posted with the findings that come out of this. We're just coming out of data collection for the check instrument that Kim was talking about, and we'll see what can be reported. In the future, at some point, what we'd like to be doing is reporting out on the check, maybe even during the January EDI teacher training. So this will all kind of come into this larger picture that Kim was speaking about earlier in her talk about that, how all our projects are going to link together. But I love your enthusiasm, and we'll make sure that we keep you in the loop if we have more information.
Oh, I love that you say, what does the check stand for? Is the, well, I should ask, the child, what's the E for?
So it's Childhood Experiences Questionnaire.
Right.
And then
CH. So
go ahead, no, you say that.
Oh, so the Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. Thank you for doing that. But the CH is capitalized just to really highlight Clyde Kurtzman and his contribution. Okay, we'll go back. We just have to get back to the questions in a second. Here we go. Okay, we got some more.
Maybe Jeff's.
Okay.
Sure. So next question. Thanks, Jeff. So Jeff is writing in, I work on many projects that match youth or teenagers with elementary kids and after-school projects. Do you know of any successful attempts to train or inform teenagers about how best to work with children to benefit from positive relationships? Training programs, things to share, or leadership teachers in high school?
Oh, I love that question. Jeff, did I plant you in there to ask? Those, that is probably one of the areas which I love. I really, I'm a big fan of any kind of programs that pair older children with younger children. The benefits of buddy programs, even starting in elementary school, are really quite beneficial. And there is, I just have to say, I'm a bit of a nerd, research nerd, I have to say. I keep on going back. There's this great study that says one of the reasons we see adolescent risky behavior from an evolutionary standpoint is that we've taken away as a society many of these things that help develop their strengths. So we used to always have older children working with younger children in part of our society. We've taken it away by our structures, and so one way to intervene basically is these mentoring programs. So I'll tell you two different. I'll give you one example from the research and tell you about this to make a case to anybody who's telling you this doesn't work, and then I'll give you an example of a program that I find really beneficial too, actually. The first one is a study which I did with some colleagues here at UBC, Edith Chen and Hannah Shire. They've now left, but it's a program where we randomly assign them 100 in grade 10 adolescents to actually go and volunteer 1 day a week after school with elementary school children. They got a bit of training and working with the children, and then they, once a week for 10 weeks, an hour and a half a week, they went and actually did cooking or crafts or some sort of after-school programming. And it was part of the Vancouver School District family of schools that they worked with and got training and working with the younger kids, and the kids had fun. But really, for this program, we are interested in what are the health benefits of volunteering with younger children. Do adolescents who volunteer with these little kids actually get healthier? And there's been research with looking at senior citizens finding that seniors who actually do volunteer reading with children, actually it decreases their blood pressure. But are there any benefits for these grade 10 students? And what we did to assess that is we wanted to look at their health, things like cardiovascular health. So we went beforehand and of this 106 kids before we randomly assigned them to volunteer or not volunteer, we took their blood. Yes, 15-year-olds will give you their blood for $15 each time. And they also, we took their height and weight. And by taking their blood, we were able to look at cholesterol and immune, something that indexes immune functioning called IL-6. And then we came in beforehand with 106 kids, 50 whatever, who went and volunteered, and found if the kids at the end where we collected their blood again to look at the effects, those students, these 10th graders who volunteered 1 day a week for an hour and a half a week with these little kids, had lowered cholesterol significantly, lowered body mass index, and lowered IL-6. That they basically improved their cardiovascular health. So anyway, so I just had to give you that case. This is like a great program, and it actually didn't take that much for training these kids in terms of working with the little kids. Now, 2 programs of which I am familiar. One is called More Sports. It's in Vancouver, and they have a program that's based on inner cities for elementary schools, after school sports for fun for kids, and they have basketball and floor hockey and badminton and soccer. And what they did to actually scale this intervention was they went to the high schools that feed into these, the elementary schools feed into these high schools, and they created a program called YELL, Youth Engaged Leadership Learn. So the coaches for this after-school program are these high school students who go through a training process in YELL to become the coaches in these after-school programs, who then are also mentored and supported by another person who's paid. So it's an amazing program. You can go on the website and see More Sports. And then finally, the other one is a program that I know is just getting started called Reading Bears. And I know Joanne Rusi, and it's where high school students are assigned with younger children and go and do readings. So that's another program you could probably just look up on the website, just called Reading Bears. So, but I just have to say, there are a number of programs that are out there to help be successful.
Great.
Are you familiar with YELL? Oh, yay! I love it. That's great. So, I mean, I could certainly, I think some examples, I could give you the data that supports many of these efforts, any mentoring programs that pair older kids and younger kids. And, the one thing I do want to say, what we find is most successful about these kinds of programs where older kids come and work with younger children is time for reflection. When they volunteer, to give them opportunities to think about how what they did made a difference, because that actually helps it sink in more in terms of who they are. So they start developing this self-identity. I'm a person who contributes to another's human development, who I've made a difference in this child's life. And it's really through reflection and opportunities to do that where you have more profound positive benefits.
Really interesting. Great. Okay, so we just have a few more minutes left. If there's any other questions, any questions or responses to the questions we have posted here, any suggestions for other topics that we could dig deeper in future webinars, we're definitely open to suggestions from you. Or would anyone like to share how their district or community is using data? We're talking about EDI and MDI data, and I know many of you have been participating for a number of years. So any other final thoughts before we sign off?
It would be very interesting, now as we've heard about this new direction of help, to find out what we can do to help get this message out more. For instance, I'll just tell you one thing that's percolating is a couple of things. One is to really have some reporting out on the data linkage between EDI and MDI. We now have data that actually shows how what dimensions dimensions of the EDI predict MDI. So, for example, we know that in kindergarten, social competence predicts children's self-reports of their friendship relationships, or that EDI help predicts FSA. So, that's one thing that's happening, so that, really thinking of you to have that data. And I think the other factor that we're really trying to work on is developing a report that's just on the after-school time, and really looking at a report that kind of sort of zeroes in more detail about the after-school hours and children's well-being. Does that sound good?
It's pretty quiet out there. I know we're getting late in the afternoon. We have some feedback here for our third question. again from Jeff. So where I find educators have great access to this knowledge, working at sharing it with our recreation partners is a good way to spread the information beyond the walls of schools. That's a great point.
Yeah, yeah, that's really where we want to dig deeper, and because we realize, I mean, I will say that Coquitlam is kind of a prototype that we try to see, because you really have in Coquitlam working there to bring together right from the start. That's the MDI was brought in there as a partnership with the community and looking at after school time. And it's a tougher road for some, I think, but really thinking about how we can do that, and that's why we thought maybe doing these after sort of something focusing really on the after school time to bring it in, and how these data make a difference, and the link between the school hours and the after school hours, how they together influence child development.
Okay, so we're almost at 4, so we'll just any last questions, and then we will say goodbye. Nobody's brave enough to try out their microphones this afternoon? Yeah. Okay, well, let's end it here then. If you have any questions that come up or any comments, please feel free to send us an email. We'll follow up with an email with this recording in case you want to see it again. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day and evening.
Thanks, Elaine. Thank you.